Hey! Hi, everybody. Happy Tuesday, happy Wednesday, depending on what part of the world you're in. Um, I know we were talking about having JoJo Roper on tonight. He called earlier, and we both had a conflict. So next Tuesday, I'm pretty sure we'll be on, maybe at the factory with JoJo and some of his boards. Um, so I got a few questions to start with. Uh, which Tavarua boatman has the most barrel time on your boards? The question is Terry or Gade? I think one of you guys probably sent it in, so I'd say you have an equal amount of tube time, which is ridiculous since you've both been boatmen down there for over 20 years. Buoyancy discussion. What's the difference between EPS, epoxy, and PU? Volume calculators are fine, but I'm talking buoyancy. I run 1.5 to 2 liters on short boards and 2 to 4 on long boards. So if a customer rides a PU and wants an epoxy, I drop the volume by 1.5 to 2 liters, and vice versa if somebody's going from epoxy back to PU. Your thoughts? Well, yeah, you're sounds like you're a shaper, but epoxy. A lot of people don't even know what EPS, epoxy is, PU, polyester. But the traditional foam we use is polyurethane, and it comes in various densities and weights. But the average blank is, what would you say, Pedro? About 4 pounds on a short board. Anyways, the glassing is what's different, and the core is what's different. So if you have a polyurethane board and you glass it with polyester resin, that's probably the heaviest construction. Probably, I think it is the least. It's not even green, and it's old. It's just the boards hold up for a while, but they don't have a very long life. The flex pattern doesn't last that long. So for years we've been doing e-polys, which is a traditional polyurethane core, but it's glassed with epoxy resin. And the epoxy resin, when we first started making epoxy boards in the mid 80s, the resins were they weren't really the cosmetics weren't really considered for epoxy resins, and the boards would come out kind of yellow, and they'd yellow even faster. But after Clark Foam closed in 2005, Christmas, yeah, December 05, we were struggling to find blanks, and the very first thing I did is I called an old friend that used to surf for GNS when I worked there, Greg Lohr, and we've been in touch occasionally over the years. And not only had he embraced epoxy EPS, but he was manufacturing it, and we talked. And so I sampled foam from all over the world. Some of it was pretty good, most of it wasn't. But I started trying to source EPS, and I made, in the mid 80s, I made some EPS boards for team riders, but I made my first EPS board around 2005, and I freaked because I'm bigger, I ride bigger boards, and this EPS board is at least 10% lighter than any PU polyester board I had. So to try to get to the point, I think the finished product on an EPS board is about 10% lighter than polyurethane core and polyester resin. The E-polys lie somewhere in between, because polyurethane core, which is a heavier blank, the epoxy is Uh, that's my baby dog. But anyways, the E-poly is a nice in between. The EPS epoxy tends to be ridden more in small surf. It's more sensitive. It's some people call it twitchy, but in small surf it's very flexible. It's got a very quick reaction time, and people, at first found it to be too buoyant, I guess. So we had to, we realized that there was a bottom line on weight of the surfboards, and so we started glassing them with a layer or two of 6 ounce, and they still came out much lighter than polyurethane blanks glass jobs. So I think it's about 10%. So the average shortboard is, say 30 liters for argument's sake. And 10% of that is 0.3 liters. So it's right on that verge of being able to feel it, but I think it's more about the ride. And when you get into bigger boards that are, say, 60 liters, it could 10% of 60 is 6. Is that right? Yeah, 6 liters. So, and you're right, 10% of 30 liters is 3 liters. So you're kind of on track with the volume, and I'd recommend EPS for small everyday surf. I personally rode it in all size surf. The E-poly is a few points lower in weight, and I think it rides insane. What are your thoughts on small moontails on barrel boards? Everything works. It just works differently. The moontails are a swallowtail, basically, but with even more area taken out of more area and volume taken out of the tail block, and it helps maintain a straighter rail line, which if you're just going to tuck in and run, it's arguably a good tail. Most of my guns these days, not most of them, but quite a few of them are small swallowtails, like 3.5 to 4 inches. And I've got some old collectible guns. I got a Diffenderfer gun. It's a 12-footer, and it's got a little 3-inch square tail. So I think there's something to be said for having a little bit of width on the tail block, and it helps you draw a longer line. It doesn't sink as much on turns. So, the moontails, sure, they're good for barrel riding, but then a well-designed swallowtail is, and a pintail if it's not too narrow. I kind of stay away from real pinny pins, and I go with almost a narrow elliptical tail. The Prana was an old favorite. What's the new version of this? The Prana, the Prana was a bestseller. I think it goes back into the mid to late 90s, and I saw Chris Ward surfing backdoor one day on a Timmy Patterson, I believe. And it was a triple wing, kind of a fishy board, kind of a semi-round nose, but it was a fishy board, and it had 3 sets of wings, which really brought the area down, and it had kind of a thinner rail, and it was ripping on it. I'm sorry, Matt, it might have been you, Tim, it might have been you, but it was one of you two great shapers from San Clemente, and so I started building some, and I've always been a fan of a break in the rail line. Hot dog boards, maybe hard wings, longer boards, a subtle bump, and then eventually, when I get into like semi guns and stuff, I take the bump out, but it's there on most of the boards I build. But having the triple set of wings really gave the board a lot of release, and it helped pull the tail in. So the tail, behind your back foot, there wasn't much area. It stepped down, and so yeah, that was a favorite for 20 years. Piranha, Pedro?
Oh yeah, Piranha was solid.
Mid-90s, maybe?
90s all the way to...
Maybe even before that. But 5 or 6 years ago, there was a lot of marketing done by someone on a model called the Hypto-Crypto, and I looked at it and I said, this board is so basic. It looks a lot like the Piranha with an elliptical tail, and so I made. We had boards like that in the past, but the marketing of the Hypto-Crypto was so intense. A lot of people bought off on them and wrote them, and a lot of people liked them. But the smoothie, the Piranha was a smoothie roots, and I built one for a friend maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and he really liked it, and so I built a few more for people, and it didn't take long before it was one of our best sellers. And I think, as was the Hypto-Crypto, it's a good all-around board. It's not I wouldn't call it, like a contest performance board, but you can ride it small enough to where you can really throw it around. You can put it up in the air. You can do clean turns on it because of the tail template. That helps with the cleaner turns. And it's got, one of the key things about it is it's got a little bit lower entry rocker, which with additional width helps you catch waves much easier. And then once you're up and riding, the tail dimension is pretty similar to a typical shortboard, in the high 14s to low 15s, and but it's got kind of performance shortboard rocker. It's pretty close, but the entry rocker is a ½ inch less, 3/4 of an inch less, and it continues to be a very popular board. And it's a board I recommend to people if they're looking, for an everyday fun board, if they're kind of new and they want to come down off of a longer board, which is something I'll touch on in a minute here. So it, and it can be ridden. I've built 5-foot to 410 smoothies. I've built 9-foot smoothies, but the average smoothie is like 6 to 7 foot long, and pretty much everyone that's gotten it has really been psyched. So, are there any conventionally accepted surf design rules that you believe are untrue? Well, with the internet and social media becoming so available, that a lot of new shapers, and I was a new shaper once, but a lot of new shapers have design takes that, I don't necessarily agree with, but there's a lot I disagree with. Like with twin fins these days, twin fins are super popular. A twin fin to me means 2 fins. It is not a 2+1. And there's so many people out there selling 3 boxes, but they're calling it a twin fin because they have a little stabilizer in the back of the board. And in my experience, I've tried that. I tried it years and years and years ago. The small fin gives you a little bit of a sense of direction with the 2 fins, because if you've never ridden a 2-fin board before, you kind of feel something missing in the tail. But if you stick with it, you'll understand if it's 2 fins and it's well designed, you can ride them in pretty big hollow surf. And the small fin, I actually feel like it gives you a false sense of security, but at the same time it creates drag. It's like on a forefin, you have 4.5-inch front fins, and I've experimented a lot with forefins. When you start getting under 4 inches, you start pushing those rear fins through the water. They're not really redirecting the water as much as you are pushing them through the water. And it doesn't sound like much, but 1/4 of an inch makes a big difference. And I think the same thing happens with the twin fins plus one boards. If you're going to get a twin fin, I would get a twin fin from a shaper with a good reputation, and it has 2 fin boxes or 2 glass-ons. But the third box, I don't know why they call it a twin fin. Anyways, you got any more questions?
This guy asking about the pinholes that we do on the torsion spring. Really?
Sophie, no. Bad. Chill. Chill.
So excited.
It'll lock you up. One of the designs that we do, or types of construction we do, is the torsion spring, and that is an extruded styrofoam. The extruded styrofoam's been around for a long time, and for a long time, all that was available was blue. Dow or whoever makes it color-coded that. It was used in the construction industry, and it's basically waterproof. But we've managed to source it over the years, and we've got nice white extruded styrofoam. And it has to be glass with epoxy. The extruded styrofoam gases a little bit. Is that right, Pedro? Yeah, I mean,
when exposed to the sun.
Yeah. It is sensitive to the sun.
Very, yeah.
And when the foam heats up, it off gases a little bit, and that would create some delamination issues. Not big, but small bubbles here and there on the boards. I believe it's our most durable construction. It's waterproof, but we found that we've had to put pinholes in the deck. And the reason for that is to allow the gas to come out, and the pinholes they're not big enough to really let much water in, or
no water.
Yeah, they're small. They're very small, but it lets the gas out, and it keeps the water from getting into the board. And so a lot of people think, well, my board's defective. I just got my new board. It's got pinholes in it, but that's part of your construction. And it's, we've had very, very, very good results with it. And it's also the greenest construction, I believe.
Yeah, all recyclable.
Yeah, everything's recyclable.
This guy wants you to talk about Talk Blackbird.
Oh, the Blackbird, huh? Yeah. Talk Blackbird.
Yeah.
Well, the Blackbird, I'll give you a little bit of lineage on it. I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, when Kelly had those little step-down boards, maybe 15 years ago, a pipe. He was like riding a 5.7 or 5.8 pipe.
Yeah, long water pipe.
And my co-partner here, Pedro, who's been with me for over 30 years, a great shaper, a good surfer. He said, let's try one. So I made him one. Were you in Hawaii when you tried that board?
No, it was here.
It was here, but he said, wow, man, that board works insane. So I started, I built some for Josh Kerr and some of the other team guys, and they liked it. The Slayer had the wide point pulled a couple inches forward. It had a slightly fuller nose, a little bit more relaxed entry rocker, and it had a longer, like if it was a 5.6, it had the rail line of a 5.10 or a 6.0 in the back part of the board. And people really liked them in slabby type ways, where you take off late and you pull in and grin. But when they tried to bring them up the face, the longer rail line kind of inhibited a little bit the maneuverability of the Slayer. And so I designed this Slayer 2. I pulled the wide point back to the middle and narrowed the nose a little bit, and gave it a little bit more nose rocker and a little bit more tail rocker. And so the Slayer 2 is more of a proper step up. The Blackbird, we had the Terminator for a long, long time, and that was like a go-to step up. It was the Traveler. The Traveler. The Terminator was a big guy board. Yeah. The Traveler was our go-to step-up board for a long time, and it kind of looked at typical proportions of the time, where the nose is about 2 inches narrower than the tail, and the wide point's an inch or two behind center, and it had a lot of nose rocker and a fair bit of tail rocker. And I just decided it was time to update that board into more modern sensibilities. Modern sensibilities, and I served blacks most of my life, since the mid '60s, and I realized early on, it's you need a board for everyday surf, but you need a step up. And so compared to the Traveler, the Blackbird and the Slayer 2, the Blackbird has a little bit fuller template than the Traveler and a little bit less rocker, but it's more streamlined than the Slayer 2. It's got a slightly narrower nose and more tail rocker, and the wide point is back around the middle, maybe a touch behind center. And the Blackbird's been a go-to now for 5 or 6 years, and that's a board I can grow up and down the line too. And I've made Blackbirds, 8.6. I made them down into the low 5s. But the Blackbird is meant to be a step up. The Slayer 2 is meant to be a step up, maybe a couple of inches longer than your short board. The Blackbird, more like 4 to 5 to 6 inches longer. So if you're riding a 6.0, you can get a Blackbird a couple of inches longer. But my thoughts are short boards these days are so well designed, you can take them into a little bit bigger surf than you used to be able to. And so the Blackbird is a step up for when there's a real swell. 6 foot means something very different to everybody. But double overhead surf, double, triple overhead surf. And Blackbird kind of represents what my whole shaping philosophy is about. It's about balance. I made Shane Horan some boards in the early 80s that had 16-inch tails and 11.5-inch noses, and they look very cartoonish. And he was almost there. He's almost winning, but came second quite a few years, and he finally came to me. He'd get boards from me when he was here for the OP Pro and on tours. But he came to me and said, "Rusty, would you make me a regular tri-fin?" I said, "Sure." And he ripped on it. But back to my point, I've kind of felt like balance is, like, if you ask me what one of the most important design credos I have is balance. The outline needs to be somewhat balanced. I think if it's too far behind center, then you have limitations. If it's too far forward, you have limitations. If the foil is tail heavy, or if the foil is nose heavy, the board starts to have a narrower band of performance. And so the Blackbird is a nice balanced step up. It's I think the template's really appealing to the eye. The foil is really appealing to the eye, and the rocker. And I think it's proven itself, because people come back time and time again for a second Blackbird, a third Blackbird, a bigger Blackbird. and that that with the smoothie and the thwart, those boards are some of our most popular designs, especially in the winter time. People start really thinking about step-up boards. So,
It's a good one. Any thoughts of bringing back the C5s?
yeah, I did a post on my personal Instagram yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the C5. I really like the Twinser, and in the early '90s, I was fascinated by the Twinsers and the boards that Will Jobson was making for Martin Potter, and the influence he had on Glenn Minami and the boards that Glenn Minami made for Martin Potter. And I tried a couple, and I really like them. I mean, if you get the fin placement right on a Twinser, it doesn't make sense, but it almost feels like less drag. You can ride a slightly bigger fin, but it feels like less drive if the fin's placed properly. And my thoughts on that were the base of the Twinser fin would be at the half point, would be at the front of the main fin, and it would be split the distance between the main fin and the rail, and they'd all point to like 2 inches off the nose. And we had a pretty good run on the Twinsers. And then I think it was in 94, 95, 94, I think. Nick Carroll was the editor of Surfing Magazine. And he, it was like one of the first, maybe it wasn't. It was like an early stab, what's it called? Stab's board test, where the different shapers
Stab in the dark.
Stab in the dark. And so Nick contacted a handful of the shapers that were popular at the time. And I've always liked Twinsers. I've always liked channels for certain conditions. And so I kind of went for it. I just went, okay, I'll have the 2 main fins a little bit bigger than normal, the 2 small Twinsers, and a small trailer with 4 deep channels. And if you looked at my Instagram last night, you could see the proportions were a nose that was probably 2.5, maybe plus inches narrower than the tail, and the wide point was definitely behind center by a couple of inches. And in order to promote the C5, we had a contest, and we were able. PT was fortunate enough to get us a permit for trestles, so we had the anything but 3 contest. We had the C5 challenge, which was 95, I think, or 96, and then the year after that we had the anything but 3. C5 challenge, I made what were my thoughts on the proper fin setup and everything, and I made it public to everybody and anybody who was interested. And a couple of entrants in the contest had C5s that looked pretty good, but a lot of them just had tri-fins with very, very, very small front fins, and they were in the wrong place, and they're the wrong angles, and but the contest was good because it stirred up some interest, and it was right around the time Tom Curran, I think, rode that. It was a board he rode in the end of the 5.7.
The other one, yeah, the fish.
Yeah, the little fish, and
huge surf.
And then he competed in New Jersey, I think, on the old twin fin, and so people are starting to rethink, something other than a tri-fin works, and there's a lot of designs other than tri-fins that work great, and so we built the C5 for a while. It costs a little bit extra to build, and I'm not sure if that was part of the reason it fizzled. But we occasionally make a Twinser these days, and I was surprised at the reaction I got on my Instagram post last night, that there's that many people that had C5s that they loved. And so,
You should bring it back.
yeah, we should bring it back. You know, it's like, you know, I totally give Will Jobson 100%. As far as I know, he created the Twinser design, and it urged me to buy like books on hydrodynamics and try and figure out why it worked and what the best fin arrangement was. And so I give Will a lot of credit for that. And a shaper that used to work for me, he actually used to sand for me at Canyon years ago, and then he started shaping, and he shaped for me for quite a few years. Stu Kenson still builds a lot of Twinsers. He's a big fan. When we were working together, we actually had a shop in IB together for a couple of years, and then Desert Storm happened, and the town was very military, and so all the business base left and went to the Mideast. But I built myself a Twinser as a 6'8", I think, and Stu's not as big as me, but he's a pretty good sized guy, and he tried it. He didn't want to give it back, and Stu's never really let go of the Twinser concept, and he still stands behind it. I do. He still builds a lot of them, and I think he and probably, we got a lot of great new models coming out, and it's hard to let them all out at once. You know, we let a few out, and then we work on refining the other ones and let them out a few months later. So I think you might see a C5.
Why did you start to shape? Why? Why did you start to shape?
When I was a small boy, I heard a voice. Why did I start to shape? I grew up and I loved to build things and make things, and my father was a mathematician, but on Sundays we'd go fly these insane kites that he would design, and he'd let me help build, and then, you know, I built a couple of those road, you know, no engine, but they're like go-karts, or, you know, you race them downhill. I forget the name, but I built those, and then when we moved I had surfed a couple of times when we lived in Serra Mesa, but it didn't really grab me. And when we moved to La Jolla in summer of '65, I think, when I first got there, I was more into body surfing, but the next summer, '66, I got into surfing, and I was so intrigued by, you know, how would you build a surfboard, or how do you build a surfboard, or, you know, what does it take? And I actually, a little before I started surfing that summer of '66, I hadn't actually surfed yet, but I bought a beat down longboard for $10, and I loved playing with resin and fiberglass cloth, and practice fixing dings even before I stood on a surfboard, so I started surfing summer of '66 properly, and I've talked about my early boards plenty of times, but late '67, early '68 was, I mean, it was the Renaissance. It was, there was footage of, you know, some great surfers riding Bob McTavish's boards at Honolulu Bay, Nat Young and Bob, and riding shorter boards with V-bottoms. And it was interesting because the surf magazines, there was Surfer and there was Surfing, I think, or Surfing World, or International Surfing before Surfing Magazine. And the ads, half the magazine was full of longboard ads, and half the magazine was full of shortboard, you know, shorter board ads. And the boards, a lot of the stores were full of longboards, and you know, I joke about this sometimes, because back then Gas was 25 cents a gallon, and a board was $200. Now gas is 20 times that much, not quite maybe. Surfboards are 5 times. So surfboards have been dragging their heels in real time in terms of cost. But so the spring magazines created quite a contradiction, and everybody always wanted something new. And the longboards sat, and they got marked. They were originally like in the low 200s, and they got marked down and down and down, and were basically considered worthless for a few years. And Mitch's had opened recently. There's a shop in La Jolla that sold. You walked in and it was a clusterfuck. There was blanks everywhere. There was no meaning, no rhyme to it, just blanks everywhere. And there was cans of resin behind the counter and a couple rolls of cloth. And I could, no matter how bad it was, I could build my early boards. It would cost me $30, $15 for a blank. I think I might have bought seconds. I think the first were 20, but $15 for a blank, and $10 for the cloth, and $5 for a gallon of resin. How much is a gallon of resin these days?
17.
$17, and a fin box. So yeah, for around $35, I could build
Polyester.
Polyester, yeah. So it was. 200 versus 35 back then. That was a huge difference, and none of the longboards they were arcane, and so the whole world started. That's when I don't know if there was a garage revolution before that one, but there was the true garage revolution where everybody just started shaping whatever. It was shorter. V-bottoms where they go for a little while, and then miniguns and so on and so forth, and. The first board I shaped, it was a life-changing experience. The board, in hindsight, wasn't very good, but it rode pretty good. In my mind, it rode pretty good because I made it. But I think that's the feeling a lot of shapers get out there, even on their first boards. It might not be the best board, but it works pretty good. And so a good friend of mine, Charles Ramsey, had at the bottom of the hill, I think there's a fire station where his house used to be, and his dad was like an old ranch guy, and he had a little chicken coop just big enough to build a shaping room and a glassing room out in his side yard, and so Charles was making boards there, Blaine, Broderson, Xavier, probably a few other guys, and so that was kind of my first factory. I shaped a few boards in a few people's backyards, like Nick Britton. I don't know if you're listening, but he just got a couple of boards for me in late '69, early '70. I shaped one in Nick's backyard, but after Charlie's, I was going to UCSD for a while, but in the summers I'd work for GNS. In the first year at UCSD, I made Starlight surfboards, and I really got addicted to shaping. And then I took a few years off, 72, 3, and 4, just to travel and shape. And then I went back to the university, and I graduated UCSD, and I graduated in 77, 78. And I said, okay, I got a degree. Now what am I going to do? And so one thing led to another, and I just ended up shaping full time. And but the long and the short of it is the process of making something, and making something that was utilitarian, something that you could actually ride and enjoy. That was the greatest thrill in my life, and I still love to shape, and I shape every day. And I've hand shaped 50,000 surfboards, but I've designed another 50,000 on the computer, and I know there's all these big arguments. What's better, hand shaping? I think hand shaping is fine if you're low volume. But once your volume starts to get up, you're either going to get further behind on your orders, or you're going to wear your joints out. And I always sort of put roughly 1,000 boards, 800 to 1,000 boards a year as a turning point. And there are some great craftsmen out there that still just hand shape. But I think as you get in that 800 to 1,000 board range, you start needing help, and you either get a ghost shaper, or you hire a cutting service, or if you're fortunate enough, you eventually get your own machine. And I think there's 250, 300 machines in the world right now, and the number's still growing. So the hand shaping will become not a lost art, but it will be a great starting point for all shapers. I know some pretty famous shapers these days that I don't think they've ever hand shaped a board, or maybe a few, but they've pretty much grown up in the computer age. And I used to trip on the amount of time it would take to hand shape a board. If you're really rushing, you can do it in less than an hour. If you're taking your time, it takes an hour and a half or 2 hours, and that's a
That's fast.
It's a test fest.
Fast, yeah.
An hour and a half, hour and a half is still kind of quick, but 2 hours, it's one thing about like an hour and a half, 2 hour time frame for the human brain to stay focused and for your body to stay fresh, and it's a decent period of time for somebody to, if they're watching, they become absorbed in the process, and instead of it feeling like 2 hours, it feels like 10 minutes or 20 minutes, and the board's done. And there was always a great feeling, that for years and years and years, of doing a hand shape, and I became pretty proficient. And I do shaping trips to other countries where I just lock myself in the room and I'd hand shape 10 boards a day, 100 boards in 10 days, and do a little bit of touristing, a little bit, not much.
This guy asks you, what are your thoughts on the asymmetricals?
On asymmetricals, yeah, I think there's a place, and I've addressed this many times before. My very first board in '67 was a Carl Ekstrom asymmetrical. I'm a goofy foot. It was made for a regular foot, and it was made for a very small regular foot. So, and I was a beginner, so it didn't matter. But as the years went by, I had a couple of team riders back in the day. Henry Hester used to be a great. He still is a good surfer, but he was a great surfer back in the day and used to compete. And he was like the first person that would regularly order asymmetricals, with the longer rail and the inside rail and the shorter. It's like a lot like the exaggerated asymmetricals you see of today. I went to Fiji the first time in '86 or '7. And that became like my go-to surf trip, and it's all lefts, especially, restaurants is just such a perfect, when it's on, it's such a perfect ruler edge left. And I had asymmetricals that I built, specifically for restaurants. But, moving forward, there's been more and more interest in asymmetricals, and some of the younger shapers are doing very creative asymmetricals. I'll tell a story one more time. I had a Tom Survey. I met him in Fiji, I think, too. He was a photographer, but he loved to surf, and he started having me make boards, and he got one board in particular that he loved, and he goes, Rusty, I need you to copy this board. And I think it was before I had the computer going, but I was very capable of copying a board very close. So I copied the board, with Got Glass. He tried it. He goes, yeah, it's a good board, but it's not the same. And I go, really? So we tried again, and he goes, this one's a little bit closer, but it's not the same. I went, bring that first magic board back in, and I measured it again, head to tail. And the one thing I discovered is his fin placement was offset. His fin on one rail was back a half an inch, and the fin on the other rail was up half an inch, and that made a significant difference in how the board rode. And I think, it's wonderful how imaginative and creative some of these younger shapers are in their outlines. But I think there's a whole world of opportunity on your fin placement alone, much less just having one, maybe your backside rail a little bit softer than your front side rail. And that's what Josh Kerr had me do one year for Chopu. And the next year he had me shape him a bunch of asymmetricals for Chopu. And as Josh does, he always did pretty good. And so, yeah, I think there's a place. But I think there's a call for a much more subtle approach, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
That's a good one. Can you share some of your thoughts on rail shapes for different boards?
Hi, Doug. She's such an attention hog. Get down.
Come here.
Get down.
Come here.
Rail shapes. I'm kind of running out of time, but I'll address rail shapes and then wrap it up. I guess it goes way back in time to my roots when I thought Hinson's rails were too down, too extreme. I thought Brewer's rails were pretty good. They had a lower apex and kind of a steep angular feel to them. I'd occasionally shape my board with a little bit rounder rail. I think it depends on your deck contour too. If you have a flatter deck, that's going to want to move your deck on the computer software. It's called the deck point out further towards the apex, and so I believe that you need to. The flatter the deck gets, the more angular the rail needs to be. The type of rails I don't like are round rails. Round rails where got a higher apex and a lot of tuck. And to me, those rails are they just seem insensitive. You really gotta bury the whole rail. Whereas a rail, it doesn't necessarily have to have a flat deck, but a rail that's a little bit steeper, but the apex is lower, and it's slightly angular. Those rails, especially once you get used to them, you tend to find that they set quicker and they release quicker. And but the rounder rails, you have to. They don't. It takes more effort to set the rail. They go in deeper. They might come out a little bit slower. But then again, if you have a very low volume board with lots of rocker, you're doing a different type of turn anyways. But a lot of the boards I see out in the marketplace, and when I'm talking the apex is, like you have the bottom of the blank, you have the top of the blank, you have the start of the deck line, and then you have your apex, which is, I average my apexes, say, roughly 5/8 of an inch up from the bottom, maybe 0.65 or 0.7, but that's getting pretty high up. And of course, the bigger the board, the thicker the board is, the more that apex is going to move up. But I think anything under a 1/2 inch, it'll get up on top of the water and it'll skate, but it'll resist turns, and you probably have fun on it for a brief period, but I think eventually you'll want a rail with a more conventional apex. And a lot of the apexes that I see on a lot of the popular boards out there these days are 0.7, 0.8, and that doesn't sound like much, but in terms of the feel of the rail, it really makes a big difference. So those are my thoughts. It is 7:54, and I've been told that I have to keep this to an hour. So I just want to wish all of you health. Stay healthy out there, and we'll see you next Tuesday. I think next Tuesday, I'll be more prepared, and I'll be with Jojo Roper and a bunch of his guns to talk big waves and guns. All right, take care, everybody. Hasta la vista.